Consider the following strong acids, ordered from the strongest, being perchloric acid, to the weakest acid, being nitric acid. And therefore the conjugate bases to these acids are ordered from strongest to weakest in the reverse direction. Now we can determine the relative strengths of these acids from their molecular structure. So for example, if we look at the simple binary acids, their conjugate bases are stabilized by electronegativity. And as we know, electronegativity increases in this direction. And the difference in electronegativity between the atoms causes an inductive effect, or induced charge. So therefore the more electronegative conjugate base is going to result in a larger dipole moment, and this makes it more difficult to give up the proton. So therefore hydrochloric acid is the weakest out of the three. And resonance is another factor that determines the strength of the acid. So for example, nitrate has 3 resonance structures because this bond over here can be between either atom. And therefore the negative charge is distributed uniformly around the oxygens, and therefore either of the oxygens can bond to a proton, which makes nitric acid the weakest out of the 3, as it doesn't want to give up a proton as easily as the other acids, and it therefore has the strongest conjugate base out of them. Carboxylic acids are a common class of weak acid where there's a carboxyl group attached to an R group. And our typical examples are formic acid, where you have a formate ion that bonds to a proton, and acetic acid, where you have an acetate anion bonded to a proton. So here we have the carboxyl group, and that's attached to a methyl group. So again, using the stability of the conjugate bases, by considering electronegativity and resonance to determine the strength of the acid, well, the conjugate base of formic acid has the following dipole moments, and so does the conjugate base of acetic acid, being the acetate anion, which gives the following partially charged regions. Now carbon is slightly more electronegative than hydrogen, so you'd also get the following dipoles, where the vertical ones cancel each other out, and therefore the methyl group induces a negative charge on the carboxyl group in the case of acetic acid. And therefore acetic acid is more effective at holding onto the proton. And that's why acetic acid is the weaker acid compared to formic acid. And note that these conjugate bases have similar resonance structures because this double bond can form with either oxygen. Strong bases, which are ionic solids at room temperature, completely dissociate in an aqueous solution. And here we have ionic bonds between the alkali metals and hydroxide ions, and because the lithium cation has a smaller ionic radius than a sodium cation, which has a smaller ionic radius than the potassium cation, then potassium hydroxide will be the strongest out of the 3. because it more easily dissociates, thereby giving a higher concentration of hydroxide in the solution. Now if we look at the alkaline earth metals, these dissociate into 2 hydroxide ions for each metal ion, and we expect that strontium hydroxide would dissociate more easily because of the larger ionic radius, and therefore this would have a higher basicity than calcium hydroxide. Common weak bases include the nitrogenous bases such as ammonia, and carboxylate ions such as acetate. So here ammonia is the stronger base because it can easily accept the proton using this lone pair to create a more stable acid, being the ammonium cation. So the conjugate acid does not readily give up this proton, so it's a weaker acid. And here acetate accepts a proton on either of these oxygens because it has those 2 resonance structures to form acetic acid. And if we compare the dipoles of these conjugate acids, so this polyatomic ion has a tetrahedral configuration, so it's non-polar, whereas acetic acid is polar. But you have these opposing dipoles, so acetic acid will give up that proton more easily, making it the stronger conjugate acid out of the 2. And stronger acids have weaker conjugate bases.